one item on the agenda. And we'll note that all commissioners are present, and we'll ask our city administrator, Mr. Kessel, to introduce the one item that we do have.
Thank you, President Johnson. Tonight we will be hearing a presentation from Gary Reddick from V3 Studios. Mr. Reddick will be presenting information on our downtown. If you recall, we hired V3 Studios and Mr. Reddick to develop kind of a downtown build-out scenario or vision process. This is an extension of that, and he has a PowerPoint that he'd like to present to support that endeavor. And the item tonight is an RFQ to support the ideas that Mr. Reddick will present this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Reddick.
Is that an introduction? I should go.
I'm
on?
You're on.
Okay.
And we're going to be done at about 4:20, okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
I mean, I'm getting up to go use the bathroom at that time, and so.
That'll be a good timing for me, too.
Okay.
My name's Gary Reddick. I'm joined here today by a partner of mine for a number of years that I'll reference a couple times today, Matt Sloan. And Matt and I have done a number of urban projects together over the last 15 years, and we were here towards the end of last week. We drove from here to Rapid City. We drove from Rapid City all the way back to Minot, where we're doing some work. And when you're out on the open road like that, and you know here a bit, better than we do how much open road there is out there, you know, you think a lot. We say to each other, where are we and how did we find ourselves out here? And I got to chuckling today on our coming here that you know, maybe more than one of you are wondering to yourselves, what are two guys from Portland, Oregon doing here, telling you know you what to do about your town? And it's a good question. One of the key parts of that is Portland. We, through our younger years in developing life, have seen what has happened in Portland over the last 20 years. We've been a part of quite a bit of it. It got in our blood, if you will, amongst all the other kinds of things that architects and developers can do. And sometimes we think maybe it was a curse and not a blessing, but helping regenerate and revitalize downtowns for the last 15 years is not only both what we've wanted to do, it's almost entirely what we have done. And so, you know, why is that? Why is that important? And I can speak from my own experience. I've been an architect for 40 years. For more than almost 20 of those years, that kind of work has fueled almost everything that I do, whether it's here and even internationally. When I look back on the international work, it was about trying to make places better. And so, you know, there are lots of truths about cities and city planning, but in you know, big and small, there is one essential truth. And that is, if you look at any place in the United States today and you deal with economists and market analysts, people and whatever, they'll tell you this city is ascending and this city is declining, without exception. And those cities that will grow and be the healthiest and be the happiest, that will have a thriving, diverse business activity, that will attract more people to visit, that will cause more people to move there, and at least as important, will cause both young and old, to decide to stay and not move away. That will cause, that will be more fun. People will talk about it. It was like, wow, have you seen, frankly, not unlike what took Matt and I to Rapid City over the weekend. Those best cities will be places that are active, vibrant, bustling, day and night, shops, restaurants, galleries, cultural events, celebrations, park space, adequate parking, nightlife, and living downtown. Think about it for wherever you go, or those favorite places. Maybe you've been to Napa or Sonoma in California, or Austin, Texas, or I could list 20 or 30 of those places, and maybe some of them start to resonate with you. My guess is there isn't one of those that you weren't partly drawn there because of how vibrant the downtown was. And that's not by accident. I mean, it is one of the essential things that people who are moving around in the American society is a nomadic culture, businesses and people, more than any other place. We move around a lot. And we more and more are making decisions about where to live on what is the quality of the downtown environment. We have made this almost a doctoral thesis over the last 15 years. And it's fun to sit now and be in a group, as we've been over the last week or so in various places, and hear other people talk about that essential truth. The richness of any culture is about what happens in the central city. It always has been. And it's where we acknowledge each other, it's where we are tied together, and it's where we feel community. Now, a couple of other things. You can't, another truth. You can't just decide to up and do this somewhere and spend money and develop and cause a bunch of things to be built, and that in and of itself will cause people to want to be there. It's that old, what was the baseball movie, if you build it, they'll come. That's not true in downtown development. There are lots of places, as hard as it is to acknowledge, don't have those ingredients to build around that cause people to want to come there. Dickinson's quite the opposite. I mean, it's got things happening and forecasted to come here that would be the envy of almost any place in the country. You're not having to wonder, how do I attract people to this town? And that is the primary question in front of many, many city councils is, if we want to stay competitive and be one of those ascending cities, how are we going to get people to move here? You're not asking yourself that question. We also know one other fact, and that is that with all the growth that's arriving at some particular places in North Dakota, Matt and I are doing some work in Minot, and we're becoming smarter about the forecasts of Dickinson, is spending money in downtown is not necessarily the top priority now, nor will it be maybe a year from now. You have too many infrastructure demands to take care of basic human services for the arrival of those people, and I fully understand that spending money at this moment in downtown is it's hard to fathom. But it's not too early. In fact, now is the time to start planning for what can happen downtown, get a team in place, and that team can help even find where some of the funding comes from, because ultimately that's what it does come to, is we can have all kinds of pretty pictures, but how are you going to build it? It becomes a funding question. And that's not that's a complex and somewhat time-consuming undertaking. So to have the vision that of what you want to have happen with downtown, and other people like myself can come in and help show a little more of what the possible might be. It's not too early to start that process and get somebody selected to help you. So I've condensed a PowerPoint down from one that a part of one that I shared here in October in a public meeting. I think I can do this in 5 or 6 minutes. And then I think it'll be great to have kind of a question and answer time. So, Sean, I'm going to take there's a chance to hit one of these. There we go. Is it possible that we could have the lights dim down? Wow. That was powerful. I've got you captive for a few minutes, so if this seems, like Urban Design 101, just bear with me for a few minutes. I think it's helpful to understand what happens in the dynamics of towns and why you're seeing all across the United States people rediscovering the connectedness and the potential that used to be second nature in the way that we settled, and the importance of central places. That's all where it happened. In the 40s and the early 50s, in the automobile and funding of suburbanization, many of the downtowns were abandoned, but you're finding that increasingly the towns are being rediscovered, and they're in part being rediscovered because not just because it's an exciting, fun place to be and all those things that I listed, but in fact it's fiscally responsible. And why I say that is that the public has already paid for the streets, sewer, water, fire, and schools that are right outside the door here. And you've got parcels that are underdeveloped. And so it's actually fiscally responsible to begin to infill and develop in downtowns, and that's being affirmed all over the country by mayors and city councils. And just some fun historical shots. When the circus came to town, wherever this town was, they thought it would be fun to take the elephants down Main Street. It's where we've always had celebration, and it's where we still do in many places. Updated, and the revival of public space and activities, and the whole notion that if those kinds of places can be programmed and structured, and people are coming downtown for events, oh, by the way, they're also shopping at all the businesses, and the businesses get better. And so you find town after town after town having renderings like this produced or by someone, or like this, or then eventually starting from scratch and building a downtown that's reminiscent of an old town but started from a green field. It's all about that scale and feeling of community that is unique to downtowns. We actually see this being tried over the last 10 years or so in what are called lifestyle centers, which is a move away from regional malls. And the lifestyle centers are about replicating that downtown street feel for 2 or 3 blocks. And I'll show you one of those projects here. Well, it's right here. Santana Row in San Jose, a 4 or 5 block long mixed-use project, retail on the ground floor, 3 or 4 floors of housing. Very highly published over the years and studied and looked at, and totally ground up development, replicating the feel of a downtown. Matt and I have had some experience several years ago in Tulsa. The redder 2 blocks in the upper part of that slide were two city blocks on the periphery of downtown Tulsa looking for redevelopment. We came in and showed how those 2 blocks could be fitted out in additional retail and office and residential, and how they would be parked, and took that through some computer rendering. And then you see And I could fill an hour or more the rest of the evening with communities around the country that are going through the similar visioning processes and a rediscovery of their downtown. Main Street, Wilmington, has a business improvement district. That is a term that you'll hear over and over as to what a number of communities are doing to create a business improvement district tax, a modest tax totally focused on and funded by those businesses and owners that find themselves in a business improvement district. And so any number of places around the country, like Dickinson, have Renaissance zones with a similar package of benefits for people who do things in their Renaissance zone. And one of the things that you notice instantly when coming to Dickinson is that there's a number of handsome buildings downtown, and not everything has been torn down. And, kind of a cute phrase, one of the best places to start is with what you've already got. And then, it's important to have everyone in the community feel they've got a stake in where this is all heading. So this is kind of a fun picture that I put in. And then what happens is that from either a fix-up facade program of an existing area or construction of a new building and lighting, and maybe it's a block from the county courthouse or an old ornate church, all over the country this is happening. And Matt and I started working in Minot a couple of years ago. They had a Renaissance Zone program that mostly was being ignored and not utilized. And we've went through a similar visioning exercise there, and now we're involved in the implementation of a couple of blocks there. And so, what we did there did not dissimilar, or frankly quite like the packet that's in front of you that's the visioning, the printout of the visioning exercise that Sean made reference to, is that we showed the before and after, a picture of a surface parking lot, and Matt and I for a number of years have not thought of those as parking lots. We think of them as shovel-ready development sites. All of the urban services, perhaps they're needing to be improved, and they've been, they're older, but it seems so much better to march on these kind of places than trying to just be focused on the periphery. So then we help show what that might look like if it was filled in. And we've gone around Minot and showed that for 10 or 12 sites downtown, and created quite a bit of interest. Showing you a few shots of some similar scaled work that we've done. This is across the Columbia River from Portland, a little town called Washougal, where we developed a catalyst block in the courtyard in the middle and a public square, and that has now moved out to causing other property owners to want to do something. Similar effort in a community called Lake Oswego, a few minutes south of downtown Portland. A 2-block project with a 3-story parking garage in the middle. I'm sorry I don't have my laser pointer. And maybe this is one and I haven't figured it out. But in the middle of that development is a 3-story parking structure ringed by retail and 2 floors of office. There you go, great catalyst for that town, and it caused the street improvements that you see in the lower left corner and the turnaround, and that off the slide to the bottom then created Centennial Park, which looks out on the lake. These initial projects are so important to get started, and it's partly where my passion comes from when I say that there's a truth. And you've got to be careful when you say that, unless you really know that you've observed over and over and over what can happen. If A happens and B happens, then you pretty much know that C is going to happen. This is that project from the intersection. Much different scale, but a whole new town or community on the outskirts of Portland. it literally has everything from retail and office and civic center and a hotel, and I've debated whether to show it in because the scale of it is so much different than what we're talking about here. But here again on 38 acres is the attempt to build all of those things that you find from the post office to the courthouse to the civic hall to all the other amenities in one place in a walkable community. And where we all kind of grew our spurs in Portland was watching what happened in the Pearl District. You see a before and after picture there over 15 years or 20 years or so. All those properties in red have been either developed or redeveloped. It's become a national, if not international, model for redevelopment. It involved a public-private partnership for almost every one of those red endeavors, those development projects, funded through tax increment financing. What they discovered was that taking that increment and helping those projects pencil is now proving the tax benefit forevermore after those lines cross. So, and you see new buildings mixed in with old, new park space fronting a new apartment or condominium building, used not only by the people in the Pearl District, but my son and wife and granddaughters come from 30 miles away in the summertime to play in this fountain. If you could read that, you'd see there's a little grocery store in the ground floor of that building. There's a drugstore in the ground floor of this building. So all of those essential urban services start to fill in. And then the first 3 floors of that slide is a pre-existing building that was that size forever. In the last couple of years, 3 floors were added to the top of it. You see this kind of thing happening all over that district. People understanding that it's important to be there. And so, you know, a term that started happening in Portland 20 or 25 years ago, air rights, realizing that the top floor of that building was just as valuable there as if it were on the ground, and a modest amount of development on top of that one. But this is a project of Matt's where he added 5 floors to an existing 6-floor Portland Place concrete building. So I'm moving towards the end here. The last thing I like to talk about is the importance of public squares within that whole picture that I'm painting, wherever they are. In most cases, I don't know where these are. I know that one's in a warmer climate than North Dakota, but it becomes the central place. I mean, in Portland, we have one, Pioneer Square. You'll see in a slide or two, people call it the living room of the city. It becomes the Saturday market, farmers market place, art shows, all kinds of things. In the middle of that picture in Santa Fe is their public plaza in the heart of that development. And if you've been to Santa Fe, you know that the main focal point there is getting to the public square. Same in Napa and Sonoma, the plaza, the main place in the heart. In Portland, it's Pioneer Square. Pioneer in that it faces the Pioneer Courthouse. It's in the heart of downtown, a full block. It's organized almost on a daily basis throughout the year of whatever the seasonal events are, night performances, the courthouse is lit up. All of those people are going to lift up at that moment when that concert's over, and those places that are still open downtown all of a sudden have a couple thousand more shoppers than they would have if that wasn't there. And at night, that's a Christmas tree in the left-hand edge. The courthouse is lit up. There's a couple sitting on that bench. And then I think it was our love of Pioneer Square in Portland that caused a number of other close-in urban, full-block urban squares to happen. You can this is not an unusual scene in the summertime in Portland. And moving along in that theme, this is a building in Europe that's got a fountain in the foreground in this, probably the summertime, and in the wintertime it's turned into an ice rink. And this is exactly what we observed in Rapid City. We knew that before we went there. It was partly why we went there, to see how that worked. And we're intrigued about the climate possibilities for that happening on a strategically located block close into downtown. Wonderful imagery. We found this many people using the ice rink on a Friday evening in Rapid City, and then hockey players out using it Saturday morning. So,
Gary,
yes.
excuse me, in Rapid City, they obviously just didn't pour some water in there and count on Mother Nature to freeze that up, did they? They've got to be using some sort of mechanical system.
They have a curb that they bring in.
It's a full mechanical
Yeah.
system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
That's a full mechanical system. They funded it half through private donation, and the city funded the other half. But it's a very nice system.
Yeah, designed right from, right from scratch. So you're all familiar with the outline of your Renaissance zone. I took liberty to, in the dash line off on the right-hand side, to say you might think about expanding it a few blocks. It feels like that is what should happen. The part that truly today feels like a downtown is in the yellow part. What we did then was begin to model a number of things, where the historic buildings were, where those surface parking lots are in the red, and we actually then created a three-dimensional model of downtown and showed what those sites would look like if they were just extruded 3 or 4 stories high, fitting in with the downtown, but filling in. And we didn't, and those are just the existing parking lots. We didn't take any attempt to say, well, maybe this building should be moved, or, but over time, you're going to want probably a bigger downtown than what's represented in those red buildings. And then we showed what it would be like to fill them in arbitrarily. We did not design each building. We showed what a potential sympathetic to downtown building might look like if it went into that location. You all know this full block-to-block parcel there. And then we did a similar thing, and this is all in a much greater detail in the book that you have sitting in front of you, of a before and after view of Villard Street, if those properties are filled in. And likewise next to the Elks Building, if that were to be filled in. And
yeah.
perhaps it would want to be a couple floors higher than that. We're not trying to make any definitive statement about land use. We're just trying to show what it could possibly look like if you did this.
Hey, Gary?
Gary.
Yes.
Could you back up to that one slide? The next one. There you go. For parking, right now that's a heavily used, used parking lot that the city owns. Could you see like a 2-story parking level garage there?
Matt, you want to
Business
join
condos
me up at the microphone?
on the 3rd floor maybe, and personal,
The
private?
quick answer to that is yes, but I've invited Matt up to also talk about this a little bit.
Parking is anytime you mention downtown development, it's all about parking. You got to start first, make sure whatever you do is very parking sensitive. We've got 2 projects up in Minot right now where we're taking a surface parking lot. Well, we're replacing it with 3 stories of parking. Go underground a level or 2, or as we saw in another project, place it in the middle of the building and building around it. Very important to not only replace the parking that you're taking away, but add to it.
Your project in Minot, so you're talking similar to this with the parking garages. I'm assuming that's a public-private program.
Right.
There. So does the private side come into, also into running the parking garages?
Right.
Or the income for the entire project, or does the city maintain that?
We're jointly managing the parking through a parking management agreement. We all decide on the best way to manage it. And what you strive for in parking is not to be parked at 50%. You want to be parked at 150%. You want to use the same stall over and over during the day. Get the best use of your money, your asset. So we've got residential units that through history, we can tell you how many residential units are going to be there at noon, 5, 10 o'clock at night, and so on. And the same thing with commercial. History would tell us how many commercial users. But they use the same stalls. And where you run into problems where you rent a stall to somebody for a month, and that's their stall, well, you're not making good use of the asset. You want to turn that over and be proactive in the management of parking.
Back to your question a little bit, both in Minot and really any other place that I have got experience with, and it was true in Portland, is true 15 years later. Public-private partnership on how the parking gets built. You can't go onto the property there and ask a private developer to be able to make it pencil all on their own pro forma without public assistance. Wouldn't happen here. It hasn't happened really anywhere. And as I say, even 12 or 15 years later, it's still an assistance that helps those projects in Portland.
In Minot, the city will retain ownership of parking, and then we will own the residential.
You could go out and find, like you mentioned earlier, I think 15 to 20 private investors into a project like this also. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it doesn't have to be one developer. I mean,
Oh, sure.
multiple
Sure, it could be multiple developers, multiple efforts, multiple uses.
Thank you.
I think that's the fire station, isn't it? Right center.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So filling those two spaces in. And then I looked at, I'm a big fan of what those downtown public squares do for the city, and looked at a couple of locations. The one, kind of expanding one that you've already got on Ballard, one perhaps behind the post office, one a bit more intriguing to me, full block in front of the county courthouse. Maybe there's some slope there. Maybe it's even got parking under it, and it's got an ice rink in the wintertime and gets lit up and becomes that central place. These are, I think we're ending here with 5 or 6 slides from our Rapid City adventure a few days ago. Great inventory of older buildings there. Not a great slide. But anyway, this is nighttime shot of that ice rink. Immediately off the slide to the left is a 3-story parking structure. Immediately on the left, the red brick building are new shops and cafes that open onto seating that overlooks the ice rink. And then, though we haven't seen this, it's not our shot from a few days ago, it shows some kind of festival going on in the summertime. So you can have all that here, and there are folks that can help you, and I should have said at the outset, but I know you moved your meeting up early today to accommodate us being here in the presentation, and we hope to find a way to help you going forward.
Okay, well, thank you.
If
Questions?
we're obviously available for any more questions, then we got a little bit into the questioning, which is I like to do anyway during the presentation. But did any of that cause any questions that anyone would?
Yeah, I have
additional-
a question. One of the points you mentioned, revitalizing the downtown one block at a time. Of course, in Dickinson, it might be hard. You know, it depends. The next step would be basically one lot at a time, but you don't want to start out too small either, do you?
No, I think you were at the community meeting back in October, and there was a great question from the audience that night, similar to the question you're raising, is, what's an appropriate start? And it took me a little bit off guard. All the times I've done this, I don't know that I'd ever been asked that before, and I somewhat blurted out an answer, but it as happens sometimes, it's what I would have said if I'd have thought longer about it. It's great if you can get 2 or 3 projects going somewhat simultaneously. It sends a great signal to the community that it's serious and that it's got momentum, and it's kind of like a pole vaulter starting at 8 feet, or do you start at 11 feet? And I think it's essential to get one started. And but if you had your druthers, you'd, as we've been fortunate enough, it looks like in Minot, to maybe get 2 or 3 in various stages coming out of the ground this coming summer. So that will be a big thunderclap in Minot. By after a while, a little bit of skepticism comes in. They can hear you talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and nothing is as good as starting to see it come out of the ground. So
you mentioned something that made a lot of sense to me, and that was, and I think we see it here, is the city of Dickinson, instead of, we're at the point where we're running out of money to invest further out. Urban sprawling, I think, is what I'm getting at here, where we got the infrastructure and so on, but investing the money downtown, like you said, where we already have the infrastructure and so on. I think we discussed, parts of our plumbing and infrastructure and so on needs upgrading, but we have also done some upgrading, haven't we, to some of our systems downtown?
Commissioner Steiner, our downtown is one area of the community where most of our underground is adequately sized. It doesn't need to be improved, at least at this moment. Depending on how successful, of course, downtown revitalization happens, you may need to resize, but currently we don't. And so Mr. Rettig's comments about it being economically feasible then sprawl is accurate. We're going to be have invested a great deal of dollars in expanding our network.
Would that be a good problem to have?
Yeah, downtown, yeah.
Not everybody's going to want to live downtown. I mean, that's another truth. I'm full of truths here today, but you'll need to provide places in neighborhoods and in expanding neighborhoods out on the edge. There's no way around that, or should there be? But you've got a moment to leverage here that you could use very successfully to make it one of the most dynamic downtowns in the country.
And one thing that we didn't touch on earlier here is the economics, what it does for your downtown businesses. We're adding 350 units in Minot this year, downtown living dwelling units. And it's been proven in the past anywhere from $6,500 to $9,500 per unit is spent downtown that wasn't going to be spent before. So those businesses that are here now prosper.
I know you touched on this in response to one of Commissioner Steiner's earlier questions, but just so our viewing public is clear, when you're filling, when you're showing that you would fill in parking lots with buildings, many times you are replacing that parking with underground parking. Mr. Rettig, I remember when we met in Bismarck a few months ago, one of the renderings or photographs that you showed was actually putting parking underground and having a park right on top of that, or the square. That these things are being done in other communities and they're possible to do.
They are, and I'd be happy to share a number of those case studies around the country. It's in fact, I'm not trying to overuse Minot here, but we felt so strongly that there be a full block kind of central place. And in fact, there on the edge of downtown is a full block playground that the high school uses, Kitty Corner. It's pretty lowly used or utilized. Has some slope across it. We walked out there one day and said, well, you know, if we raise the park up to coincide with the upper intersection right at the corner of the high school, all of a sudden it's 9 or 10 feet higher than the playground, and we could park under there. Well, we have a major initiative going on in Minot where we're going to place 250 parking places out of sight under the new community all-year-round surface park that will have concerts. The high school will use it. They can play soccer. Kids can play, kids soccer on Saturdays. Any event that you can think of. And right underneath it, a lot of times those places flounder, and that's a little bit of the maybe the point you're leading me to is that and Matt touched on it earlier. I don't care what kind of project it is that I've had in my career. Ultimately, you get to it's going to be all about parking. And so it's one thing to locate something like that and know that it's been done in other places of the country, but when you delve deeper into it, they also solve the parking problem. And you've actually got that opportunity and that space out in front of your county courthouse. The courthouse is raised on a plinth. You all know that, 3 or 4 feet out of the ground. The site is starting to slope there, where downtown it's flatter. And I can imagine that could have a similar design as what we're doing in Minot, where a couple hundred parking spaces could find themselves there underneath the new community park.
When you talked about a private-public partnership, and that I think you said none of these projects work without public monies being involved. Typically, what kind of split do you see? Is it 90-10, 80-20, 50-50? What?
We've got 2 projects in Minot coming up where the parking garage is about $4 million each, and we're putting in $18 million above each one, and then we're putting another $750,000 into each of the garages. And then we're using a $500,000 donation to catalyst the park.
So, and the public sector would pay for like the parking, is that?
Right. It's public parking. It's sometimes it's fee parking, sometimes it's not. You try to generate fees off the parking, daytime use on the parking. Try to generate the fees to pay for the maintenance of the building, but the initial investment is primarily paid by public. Like I say, each one of those we put in $750,000 into the parking structures. Out of $4 million.
How much are you getting out of the Magic Fund?
$3 million's coming out of Magic Fund.
$3 million?
We've got another $5.3 million coming out of CDBG funds. And the CDBG funds, we pulled them into the picture by giving, it's federal funds, by giving 20% of our units above to 80% of median income, affordable units.
Just one more comment on that. We spent enough time in Rapid City to get a little insight into how that question could get answered. That public park, slip of the, public and private, the public park downtown, all year-round investment there was approximately 50-50 public and private. Recall how many private?
And it was private donations.
Yeah.
You may have talked about this and I missed it. The residential development downtown really intrigues me. Have you thought about complementing university housing, student housing, with housing downtown? Have you done a project like that?
Tried to in Salem.
Yeah, we tried to in Salem. We had one project that we actually didn't get off the ground, that we had a great synergy between us and Western University there in Oregon, but the market went bad in that city right when we were about to start, so we just put it on hold.
Do you see that as a possibility?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
There's, this probably is a little bit overly simplified, but getting people to live downtown. Rapid City is a little bit contrary to that, but almost any other place that if you asked us, how does this get started? It gets started by getting people, and usually initially it's apartments, not condos, getting people to live downtown, and then once the retailers start to see that, and they've got the rooftop, so to speak, it starts to infill, and you get that ball rolling. So, you know, in that way, it's everyone should see that there's a place they could possibly live in downtown. It doesn't tend to be highly family housing for the obvious reason, but it's from the youngest to the older. An interesting footnote about the Pearl District in Portland: it was assumed by all of the developers that it would be almost entirely 20 or 30 something or young professionals without kids, and it's what they were startled by, and it has become is middle and upper age people, and many of those selling their larger houses in Portland. The kids are gone, and they like the community and village feel of living there with everything they needed right down at the sidewalk.
I don't think your use of Minot is too extreme, because that's where competition is. It's the Minot, the Willistons, and so on. You know, we'll take our West River Community Center, for example. It got noticed by everybody in North Dakota, and now Williston is building one bigger. I would almost guarantee that if we went along and did a downtown improvement, you would see these other communities start looking at that also. I mean, you're doing Minot, we got wind of that, we're looking into it. You know, I think it's a great time right here. If we can't do it now, and I know we got to look at the numbers and everything, but we may never ever be able to do anything for our downtown ever again if we don't take advantage of the times we have now. That's my personal feeling. But
you know, I mentioned I've been doing this a lot, and I do it a lot because I enjoy it, and I really believe in it, and I'm full of quips. And one of them, I guess I'll leave you with that people either get the city they want, or they get the city they'll get. And the get part is that you don't have your hands all over it, and you're not working hard, and you haven't built a consensus about the vision. And when you do that, then you'll have the Dickinson that you want people to walk around in 10 or 15 years from now. And that's an exciting opportunity here.
We're out of time, but
Yep.
I'm going to ask you one more question, but you got to answer it in like 60 seconds or less. The facade program, how do you, since you know these buildings are all privately owned, how do you motivate the owners of these buildings to change the facade?
I thought you were going to ask me how might that get funded, and there's a couple of ways to do that. LID, Local Improvement District, or there's some Main Street programs and renovation programs, grant money. What we have seen is that when the projects, the new projects are being built, and the tenant mix is starting to get better, and when leases come up, some of the uses are being changed out. It's just a general enthusiasm and momentum that kind of lops over, if you will, to existing businesses. I can't say that happens in every instance, but it happens enough to, call it part of that phenomenon where everyone feels prideful about the way the downtown's starting to look.
Providing a fund where they can get low-income or low-interest loans to do storefront improvements has been used quite a bit.
So the city would likely be the one that would have to develop that fund and do that? Would that be your experience, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay.
City or your development agency administers the loans and recoups the money.
We're right on schedule.
We're right on schedule, and since we have our regular commission meeting in about 10 minutes, we thank you for being here, enjoyed your presentation.
It's our honor to be here, thanks.
And we will adjourn the meeting now. And do I need a motion to do that, Matt? Yes, so Chair to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll
So moved.
We have the motion and the second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. The motion carries.